within your book of about Ibn Battuta and all these. But I get the sense that they really had freedom in their own way as women from the way he writes, because it's right across the board. It's like any it's it's like any society really that you would find maybe even today. So I don't
So
know.
I think there's a misconception that when we say medieval times, right, 14th century, we somehow think that it's a very archaic time, that, it was really backward. But if you look at the architecture tells you a lot about the 14th century. So the Duomo in Milan, the courtyard of the
Yes.
lions in
Yeah.
Alhambra, the Lanka Tilaka in Sri Lanka. So actually, the buildings convey a very modern story in a sense for that time. So I would not be surprised that in the 14th century, in the medieval era, it all depends on, economics. It's the same today. If you
Yeah.
were a woman who was well born and who belonged to a high caste family, you had far more advantages than women who are not. So,
Right.
and it is pretty much the same today here. So, I would say Ibn Battuta accurately depicted a wide section of women like that.
Yeah, even though he didn't really write about them per se. But you know what? I mean, I think he was here in Sri Lanka in 1344, I think you said. And by then he was well seasoned and a middle-aged traveler. And he says nothing about the women of this country in his writing, except to mention 500 dancing girls that I don't think he even saw. And he didn't even fancy one of our, I mean, he didn't even think about taking a wife here. So, this is not the
But
reputation that women have. So,
so he was not here for a long time. He was here for about 2 months. But he does mention, so which means that he was seeing the women, and also that he was observing them. So the one point he mentions is that all the women of this country were bedecked in jewels around their
oh
throats,
yes,
around
yes,
their
yeah, yeah,
ankles, around their wrists. And true, it was a commentary more about the abundance of jewels, but he talks about how the women were dressed. And he specifically says that the concubines of the king wore a
mm,
network of pearls on their heads. And I thought, so they actually had caps of pearls. And I thought that would have been a very beautiful and luxurious sight for him. Um,
yes,
he does, we're talking about whether he took a wife. It's really strange that when he leaves the shores of Putlam to go back to India, South India, he encounters a storm. The ship encounters a storm, and they had to
okay,
abandon the ship. And then what happens is he has two slave girls. Now, where did those slave girls come from? So I wonder, did Arya Chakravarti gift them? Because he does say, take the one I love. He tells the rest of the merchants, take the
right,
one I love to safety, and I will come back later. So he was a little bit chivalrous as well.
yes.
So that's the only mention. And I like to think that maybe it was a Lankan slave girl that he got from Arya Chakravarti, or maybe not. I don't know.
I don't know, but it's in a way it must have been wonderful, because you're sort of walking through these nooks and crannies, and then you get these little insights. So, I mean, that brings me to my next question, because I want
But
to
can
know about.
I, can I, can I go
Yes,
back about the
yes, yes.
500 dancing girls, right?
Yes, okay,
So so he's talking about the dancing girls in the Devi temple. And that
okay,
temple was magnificent. It was destroyed by the Portuguese. It stretched for a kilometer. And I'm not sure if there are any other accounts of how the temple looked from
okay,
any non-European sources other than Ibn Battuta's. So he talks about the idol being man-sized, made out of gold, having rubies for eyes that was so brilliant. They served as like lighthouses for ships that were
right,
coming too close to the rocks. So when I was doing the research on the dancing girls, wondering why we don't have dancing girls today. one of the insights that came from Ratnapura, because the Saman Devale is very, very closely related to, having dancing girls in their rituals. It was also an issue of regard. It's that in modern times, dancing girls are not regarded as, being as a profession that is worthy. They're looked down upon, and gradually these temple dancing girls, did other things. So it'll be, I've never seen to date, I have personally never seen, I'm not talking of the Candy Perahera, where you have incorporated female dancers, but these more ritualistic uh, dancing that happens within temples and within religion.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, and that whole ritual also seems to have died away. Yes?
Yes, I think so. Except they have, I mean, in the Saman Devale and Kataragama, I know they have some. They're called Kiriyammas, and
Right.
there are a few women, maybe two, who come and do some kind of short ritual. But when you compare it to the 500 dancing girls, it's quite different from what used to be.
Yeah, I mean, you described some of it, and it would have been spectacular to see, you know. I mean, all these women sort of beautifully dressed, and you talk about crimson saris with gold borders, and,
And
it's
I think
very
also they were held in high regard because they were pledged to the temple. So they weren't treated with scorn. But somewhere, maybe along as time went on, and with colonialism, the dancing girls began to be regarded as no better than prostitutes. So then they
yes,
then
yeah.
of course they were devalued, and that died off.
So to come back to what we were talking about, I'm curious as to your experience as a primary researcher and as a woman, Amina, researching this trajectory and the spaces of Ibn Battuta. It must have been challenging at times. And, I think you had to push through quite a few obstacles or barriers or prejudices. I don't know. So, would you like to talk a little bit about that?
So yes, it was. I mean, in Sri Lanka, even in the 21st century, it's not. Sri Lanka is a fairly traditional country. I mean, in the sense that we are used to seeing white tourists, female tourists, traveling on their own. They're solo travelers, but it's rare for me to see a female traveler who is not either going on pilgrimage or to visit family or work, who is traveling on their own. So I had Sam Pereira, who's my husband and partner in the firm, and who very, very sweetly decided to be my driver on all these excursions. So maybe having Sam around really helped. But when you came to the research, the people, my informants, had to talk with me. It wasn't Sam that they had to speak with. So since I had to go to a lot of mosques, and each time I was told I had to go to the mosque, I was a little bit hesitant because I wasn't sure what kind of reception I would have. I had a few interesting initial encounters. It's like, shoo, off you go. This is not the women's section. You have to use the side. But once I explained what I was doing, everyone was really welcoming, and everyone was willing to speak and to give me their time. But it was something that I think everybody who travels in Sri Lanka, anybody who goes around, we don't have to travel far, we just have to walk on the road in Sri Lanka. It is, we have some kind of, we're very aware of our surroundings, we're very aware of who is around us. And I think so. I was very cautious, I was very respectful of the people I was speaking with, and the places I was going to. If they were religious places, I was very careful not to overstep the boundaries. So I always traveled with a shawl. I would cover my head in respect to mosques. And if I went to a Buddhist temple, I would try to wear white. I would try to have cover my arms. So there's all that preparation that you need to do.
Yes, I mean, in the book, well, I suppose because he doesn't really talk about women, you don't really get that sort of sense. I mean, I felt more that women were moving around a little more freely, maybe in their own right. Like when you talk about the women in Mali and the women in the Maldives and things like that, you get, so this is to get to my question about, the social positions that these women occupied from top to bottom. What is the impression that you got of how the societies treated women? Because if a woman could walk around completely unclothed, you know
But that was, but Mrinali, that was normal. It's because, I mean, women in Sri Lanka also would have been going around unclothed from the waist up. It was because it's only after we were colonized and we got Victorian sensibilities that we have become very prudish and very judgmental about what women wear, and also maybe sexist in a way. At that time, most women in South Asia, I would say quite safely, because of the climate, because it was just suitable for them. They went around with their tops uncovered. They may have a shawl that'll cover their breasts if they were going out, but they weren't going topless wasn't considered a sexual thing, I think, at that
okay.
time.
Yes, yes.
But I what I want to say is that Ibn Battuta was amazed. He was, after all, a Muslim man, and he was quite used to women being constricted. So when he reaches Anatolia,
Okay.
which was the Muslim part of Turkey, he was really struck that the king and queen ruled together, that the queen had her own properties, that he was struck that the king would never sit down until the queen was seated first. That when the queen wanted to leave, the king would stand up and escort her out. There were these, what we would think of maybe as modern day courtesies, a little bit archaic maybe today, but very, there was a lot of courtesy accorded to them. Plus, he met lots of princesses and queens. So in the Maldives was ruled by a queen. It was not unusual at that
Yeah,
time
sorry, I'm just.
in the Eurasian steppes. He meets a princess who, when he does not go for her banquet, she summons him. And she summons him and says, "Why didn't you come?" And he says, "Because I wasn't sure of the way you slaughtered your meat, because it needs to be slaughtered in a particular
Okay.
way.
Yes,
I'm a Muslim."
yes.
She was so taken up that he wanted to stay true to his faith, even at the expense of being hungry, that she gave him jars of salt, dried fruit, and all that to take with him on his next journey. So
Yes.
he does meet powerful women, and he clearly knows how to handle himself around them. So I think, as I mentioned earlier, it is status. It's a matter of money and power that gives a woman her freedom.
Okay. Amina, can you also refresh your screen? Your connection is a little bit patchy, so I was a bit worried. I was wondering whether if you refreshed your screen, it might be better.
Okay, I'll do that now.
I don't want the audience to miss anything that you're saying. So while she does that, I'm just going to move on to the next part, which is Amina did this research for the ICES. Sometimes there is no blood. And I just want to talk a little bit about that till we have Amina back again on screen. Move a little bit away from Ibn Battuta. Oh, there you are. Much better, much
Can you
better. I
hear
was
me
worried.
now? Is it
Yes,
better?
I can. Yes, much better, much better. I was worried that
Okay, is it better?
uh, yeah, would miss some of what you were saying. I'm going to move us on to sometimes there is no blood because You edited this volume, I think, for ICS, a survey of research on violence against women in rural areas, published by the International Center of Ethnic Studies in Colombo in 2001. In 2022, more than 20 years later, Ameena, we are still talking about gender issues, biases, discrimination, violence, as we have for centuries. Is nothing changing? Could you please wear your sociologist hat for a minute? I mean, what are we not doing right? Or what are we not getting right? Did you hear me? Can you hear me? Hello? Did you hear my question? No?
So I was having a chat with a friend on Sunday evening. I can hear you. Can you hear
Okay.
me? I can hear you. Can
I
you
can
hear
hear you
me?
now. Yes, I can
Yes,
hear
I
you.
did.
Yeah,
I did. But you can't
right.
hear me. Can you hear me? Can
I
you
can.
hear me
I can.
now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I was having a chat. I was having a chat with a friend. Okay. I was having a chat with a friend on Sunday evening, and he made the observation when we were just talking about life in general in Sri Lanka. He was visiting from another country, and he said, in Sri Lanka there's a lot of religiosity, and he was talking about it in the sense that they're very ritualistic in their daily life. They will go to temple, they'll go to mosque, they'll do pujas. But thinking back on that, I think religion is very patriarchal, and I think we are a very patriarchal society, and in being a patriarchal society, it makes then a framework where women are limited to working within. And in a patriarch, can you hear me, Mrinali?
Yes, I can hear you. Yes. Sorry. Yes.
Yeah. So within a patriarchal society, a woman, I mean, you have a man who is the head of the household, and so a woman's status is also very closely connected with the head of the household, with her husband, which is
Okay.
why I think that domestic violence is also not reported, not spoken about, that the state does not give enough of support, because inevitably, I mean, it happened in 2000, where the police would say you should not break a family, and I'm still hearing stories where when you go to report a case, the police still say a woman should go back to her family, you shouldn't break it up, even at the expense of violence. I don't know why we haven't progressed from that time. I mean, it's really puzzling, because we are very willing to move on technologically and advance in terms of professions. But when it comes to the family framework, it's still very much traditional.
Yes. I mean, it is puzzling. I mean, to me, and I think to many people, why we are still talking about the same things and we still seem to be in the same place. But to move on to the next question, you made the observation that you thought that the younger generation is not that enamored of feminism or a feminist viewpoint. What would you say to women and girls in realizing their role and place in society? I mean, especially like leading on from the earlier question, what can women do? Or what should we be doing, in your opinion?
So there is a TV show. I think it's called Face the Nation, and yesterday. It aired yesterday, and I listened to bits and pieces. But the first speaker, I can't remember who the first speaker was. I was really surprised, maybe saddened and surprised, that she starts off her presentation, and it was about Women's Day. They had it a day early, they were celebrating Women's Day, and she said, the biggest problem that women have in this country is not that men don't support women, but that women charge. I mean, actually, the biggest problem is that men don't support women. I think that is very clear. I don't think you should focus on that women don't support women as being the cause for why women are not doing well in this country. So I've also been surprised that when I meet younger people and I say in conversation, if it does come up that I'm a feminist, or if they talk about feminists, they're very negative about it. And in fact, they believe feminists to be, bra burning, rabid militant, butch women. They have a very narrow stereotype of what feminists
Yeah.
should be. And I think that they are allowed to have those ideas and images precisely because that they actually enjoy a lot of freedoms that they do not understand or know that many Sri Lankan women and women all over the world fought for, that now they take for granted. They should realize that everything that you enjoy as a woman today has been fought for by a previous generation. Everything I enjoy has been fought for by the generations before.
Okay.
So
So
I'm really thankful that there were women who were feminists before me and who got rights that I can enjoy. But also, I will say, what is a feminist? I mean, for me, it's a very simplistic definition. I'm a feminist because I want myself and women to live life on their own terms. And actually, if all there are thousands of young women in Sri Lanka and not in Sri Lanka who don't live life on their own terms. Some of them don't get an education, some of them cannot work, some of them are married very young. Sometimes they don't have a choice in who they marry. Simple, silly things like they are unable to wear what they want, they're unable to go to places. I mean, we in Sri Lanka, we will think twice about what we wear. We will think twice about where we go and who we go with, what we're wearing when we go to those places. So why? Because we don't feel safe. And actually, feminists fight to make the world a safe place for women.
so what you're saying is that if the younger generation doesn't think this is an important thing or doesn't take much notice of it, we might actually lose some of the ground that we have already won. Or we could. We might,
Yeah,
we are in
I think they
danger
take
of.
a lot for granted. They are not exactly, and I think I think you can see that happening even in America with abortion rights, right? And so just because you win certain rights, if you do not make them always important, you can lose them in the future.
Food for thought for the younger generation. But can I move the conversation to your publishing and writing a bit? Because I think, people would want to hear about that. So I know this is another topic that, you get asked a lot. It's something that, is I think, a hot topic whenever anybody meets Ameena Hussein. But I'm also taking away from my interview with Sam some time ago. What got you into publishing, and what style do you adopt when working with a writer? Because I have Sam's version. I'd like to hear, how you approach a writer and as a publisher.
So, we started the publishing house in 2003 December because actually there were no publishing houses that were run on international lines in Sri Lanka. You either went to a printer and you get it self-published, or you approached a bookshop that may have a publishing arm. We didn't want to do any of those things. We wanted to be only publishers. It's a very good thing that both Sam and I have completely different approaches because Sam Pereira and I run the publishing house, and we're both editors, and we have completely different approaches to the manuscripts we get. So when I get a manuscript, I will read. I work very closely with my author, in the sense that I want, when you edit a manuscript, you don't want to lose the author's voice, but you just want to make the story stronger, and maybe uh, I I compare it to like polishing a raw gemstone to make it the jewel that it is capable of being. Um, I I notice that I have published more female authors than I have worked with more female authors than male authors. And maybe that's because I don't know whether male authors don't take direction very kindly from a woman or not. And Sam gets along better with the male authors and female authors. So maybe he balances things much better than I do. But I always love working with authors, because you always have different approaches and fresh insights to the work that you are doing.
I love what you said about hearing the author's voice, because reading Ibn Battuta, I was so glad that I had met you and spoken to you, because when I was reading the book, I could hear you, as I read the lines. And it's such a gift, because we don't always have that luxury. We don't always meet authors of books, especially when you read international writers, and you rarely meet people. So you really don't know the cadences of their speech, you know, and it's such a wonderful thing. So I hope that people who listen to us speaking today also will go back and revisit your book, because then they will really hear you narrating some of those tall tales. It's really wonderful. So I also wanted to talk to you in terms of women writers and writing, because you said you have been working mostly with women writers. What genres would you like, Ameena, to see women explore more? Do you think that we tend to write sort of more softer things and we don't really sort of approach the harder topics? I don't know, or the harder genres.
No, that's not true at all. In fact, I'm still
Okay.
waiting for a good romance novel to hit my desk. Nobody is writing good romance. So I think what has happened with Sri Lankan literature is the 26-year war really scarred us and affected us a great deal. So I still get a lot of manuscripts that write about the war. Uh, or they write about social issues. We very rarely have, well written, light-hearted fiction. And
Hmm.
I would like to see more of it. So there is a disconnect in Sri Lanka, that if you have to make a social commentary, that you have to be heavy and it has to be serious. But I recently published a collection of short stories by a gentleman called Satis Dimel, and
Okay.
the title of the book is called The Good for Nothing. It's
Okay.
called the It's hilarious, and it's a social commentary on a little suburb in Moratua, and it's all the shenanigans, all the typical, middle class, small town foibles and situations that people get into. And I like it because it's actually rare for me to find a manuscript that I read and I'm amused and I can laugh out loud. Andrew Fidel Fernando's, Upon a Sleepless Isle is another really funny book,
Yes.
and it's also a
Yes.
commentary, because he's traveling around the country, but he's able to laugh at himself. He's able to see funny situations that occur, and I think we need humor in our lives as much as we need the drama, as much as we need we need humor, we need romance, we need love, because we don't have enough of those in our Sri Lankan literature at least.
Okay.
In
So
no,
that's
I should specify in writing in English because I think Sri Lankan literature in Sinhala is a total different ball game. They have everything.
yes, I'm sure, and even the Tamil writers, I'm sure they have everything, but the English writers have ways to go. You're saying interesting. I mean, can I ask you one more? Can I move to women in general? I just want to just talk to you because it's International Women's Day. Do you mind if I move on to that and leave the writing for a little bit? Um, I we were talking about the younger generation and women, and you were talking about feminism and all. What what would you advise? What sort of trajectories? What would you tell women of the younger generations to explore for them to grow? Because I remember we had a conversation before this, and we were just talking about how can, like, how should they approach their futures. Oh, in your opinion, what would you like to see young people do, young women especially, for their own future?
So I think that, I mean, when we more, because we are based in Colombo, we are very influenced by what we see with Colombo with young women of Colombo. They seem to have every advantage, and maybe because of those who we meet, they are now more educated. They having a university education is almost taken for granted. Working is almost taken for granted. But no, I'm not sure if the younger generation of women is having conversations about financial security, financial independence in those sorts of terms, because we still very much, because we are so traditional and we frame our whole lives in the sense of, okay, you will get married, and then after that, how do they know how to talk about finances with their husband, or with their male partners, which I think is very important. I think it's very important for a woman to have to be financially independent and financially stable. In the village, I think it's a slightly different conversation. I think women are still very, very constrained. I mean, a situation I have been somewhat involved with is that there is this young woman in the village where we have our estate in the north of Putlam, and she did hotel school, the government sponsored hotel school. And just for her to go and get a job in a hotel, there's so much pressure from her family to not go. So they wanted to remain in the village. They'd rather her be a field worker than for her to go and practice her skills in a hotel, because the hotel is far away from home and she might have to stay there. So there are lots of things that city women take for granted that the village don't. So we need to change those concepts. We need to, and you can't do that overnight. It's a slow process where women need to also assert themselves, and men need to be comfortable with assertive women.
But isn't it curious that she was allowed to engage in that form of study, but then she couldn't really put it to use? That they didn't feel comfortable about her putting it to use. Don't I mean
So she was, and I think they didn't know that when she finished, she would actually want to work in the field. But she's a feisty young woman, and I know that she will go far. So I try to support her as much as I can. But the danger is, because she's from the village, I have to be very careful also, so that the village people don't see me as a bad influence on her. So it's really complicated, and you have to tread very
yeah.
carefully in these kinds of situations.
And so much we sort of city people who have grown up in the city, how much we take for granted, really. And I mean, I take your point that we shouldn't take it for granted, that we should be conscious of it and sort of try to to grow from this, to move forward from this rather than sort of becoming complacent and allowing things to sort of regress. Um, what do you think Ibn Battuta would have made of us? If maybe if he met the two of us, what do you think he would have made of the women he finds in Serendip today? Do you think he would have written more about us?
I think so. I think we would have made him write about us because we would have been. I mean, the world in in a way, I think 14th century, 21st century, not that much difference, and then there's a world of difference. If he came today, he would be having to meet and engage with a lot more women on equal terms or superior terms than he did when he traveled in the 14th century. So yes, I think anyone who travels today will have to write about women, though it's interesting that when I traveled on the Imbatuta path on the trail in 21st century Sri Lanka, it was a male audience that I was encountering. And it was mostly male. Now you made me think about that. So here I was a woman traveling, but I was speaking to women, to authority figures were men. Um, they were all men.
Seriously, not
Hard.
one woman.
I can't think of a woman, but 2 points stand out. One is there's a mosque in Ratnapura, one of the mosques I went to, big mosque, and that has a legend and a story that is in the book. And that mosque is about a woman who came with 40 men on pilgrimage to climb Adam's Peak. The
Yes.
mosque is named after her. The one woman who came, the mosque is named after her. So it's also interesting who this woman was. Was she a noble woman who came, and was she powerful enough to travel with 40 men, maybe her family members, but still she had some status. The other mosque is in Mutuwal in Colombo, and that's a woman saint. It's a female saint.
Okay, a Sufi
So
saint, is it?
Sophie said, yeah. So
Yes.
in that way, I was also struck that the keepers of her shrine were men, but all the people around her were women. So my informants were all women, and we went, we traipsed off to the shrine in this with this large group of women, and they just totally ignored the keepers of the shrine and told me the story and said, "Now go down this way and go down that way." And they were the authority figures, but they were not the official ones in charge.
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, this is why I love reading books like the ones you have written, because it's the nooks and crannies in those books that really sort of sometimes get me excited. I don't know about others, because it makes me sort of wonder about what people would have been like. Um, just that there are some questions from the public. So there is um, there is one person who's been posting quite a lot. Most women in the Middle East read a lot and are very intelligent. Most men, on the other hand, are more concerned with sports or violence. I am a teacher and I give free classes to Afghans. 90% they learned English by themselves. Okay, so there is no real question. He's just
But
making.
I can also make a comment in that today, I
Yeah,
think women study more than men. So I think even the universities in Sri Lanka, you have more women going into the university than men. I think even in the law college. Uh, you have women in the workforce, though not enough. If you go to a government office, many of the women who are working there are many of the people working there are women. But it's interesting to study the authority figures. Are they men or women? So are women going up to a certain position and stopping there, and it is the men who are carrying on with their career? Women are the primary caregivers in cases of children, in the cases of the elderly. So I think Sri Lanka is needs to have more women in the workforce contributing towards the economy. And the state
And
needs to support
yeah.
that. It doesn't happen in a vacuum. And I think the state is not that geared for that kind of support just yet. But it needs to happen.
Yes, I mean, I don't know whether it's happening. It's almost like affirmative action. That's what you're saying, isn't it? Where there is sort of that conscious effort to sort of elevate a woman's career. But I don't know whether anywhere else in the world they're doing it either. Do you know?
Well, I know that in countries like New Zealand and in the Scandinavian countries, fathers get paternity leave as well. So,
Okay.
which means then that they take care of the baby, and then the wife can go back to work. In Sri Lanka, it's I think only 3 months paternity leave. Then the woman goes back to work, but she's still the primary caregiver, and she still has to juggle a lot. It's very stressful on women, and I think the pandemic showed that up a lot. Where when schools were closed and children were being taught at home, women discovered that not only did they have to work, not only did they have to run the house, but they had to become school teachers as well. So it was a lot on their plate.
Yes, I know. I interviewed Dr. Hiranti Vijayamana, and she was eminent doctor, but she also raised two children, and she said it was a matter of juggling. I remember her saying this distinctly. She said we had to juggle away, which is, I mean, it's a daunting thing for anyone to undertake, really. I mean, it's so many different roles and so many different faces to wear. But growing up, would the 16-year-old Ameena have ever thought this would be the Ameena that we see today? I mean, did you have ambitions and dreams and sort of, or did you just grow? Was it more organic than that?
Yeah, it was very organic. I was a strange child. I will say that. I feel sorry for my parents who had to deal with this creature who was really weird. And it was very organic because growing up, I come from a very conservative Muslim family, and higher education, working were not exactly not what I saw. I didn't have many role models with that. So I have to say thank you in a way to my parents, who dealt sometimes badly with me wanting to do certain things that may not have fitted in with their worldview of how a Muslim woman should be, but they had to deal with it, and eventually they came around. So no, I was not ambitious. I was not especially clever. I was not. I don't think a single teacher remembers me in school, but I think that's one of the things is that because so I was allowed to actually just be and float, and I've been very lucky. I will say that over and over again. Luck has played a huge part in my life, and I'm very, very grateful for that.
We have a question. How important is in a patriarchal countries or societies to promote women's financial independence? I think you talked about it before, and I think that's where the question comes from.
Yeah, so I think the nature of the question, when you say patriarchy, it immediately means that a woman has to be subject to the male point of view. So it all depends on the goodness of the male guardian, either her husband or her father or her brother, in some cases, who says, okay, you can work, you can't work. Who controls the money? I mean, basically, who is controlling the money of? Do they have a common pot? Uh, does she control her own money? So I think there are all those questions, and I think in Sri Lanka, these questions are not necessarily addressed, over the table. It's a lot of negotiation that happens. I know that there are some instances where the salary of the man is handed over to the wife, and she then manages the household income. She may give him some spending money. I think that used to be quite common earlier in very traditional middle
Yeah.
class. Sri Lankan houses, but it has changed, and I think we need to see women as human beings in their own right who can make decisions about themselves, for themselves, and also for the family together with, with the husbands and with the fathers, and for the well-being of the family and for the country.
Thank you. I mean, I think that's a wonderful note to end on. I mean, it's been an hour and it has just whizzed past us, and I haven't even felt the time. So thank you, and for sharing so much of your journey and your experience as a writer and a publisher and a woman who supports gender studies. I hope people in our audiences will take away some inspiration from your experiences and from this talk today, and maybe sort of engage in some similar activities so that we don't sort of give the ground that we have, achieved, that we don't give it away. So thank you for being our guest today for International Women's Day, Ameena, and for the example of your life and your work. Thank you very much from the British Council. So
Thank
at
you.
the British Council, sorry, Ameena,
Thank
sorry.
you very much for having me on this platform. It was an honor and a pleasure.
Thank you. I'm sorry we had small connection issues, but I hope that when the recording comes out, it'll all come out well in the wash. Thanks, Amina. Thank you. And I also want to say at the British Council, the ambition to reach gender equity and eliminate disadvantage is at the heart of our women and girls work through our core pillars in English, education, and arts and culture. Whilst addressing some of these issues directly in the longer term, our interventions are aimed at attitudinal change, tackling gender norms among women and girls, as well as men and boys, and thus enabling the former to participate fully in society. We use all of our portfolio to achieve these aims, to ensure that women and girls have the awareness, skills, confidence, and networks to improve their own and others' lives and contribute positively to the communities they live in. So, this is absolutely taking away from what Amina was saying. Thank you to the audience. It has been a privilege to have you share your time with us and join in this discussion. And I do hope you will look up some of our past events. We have we have all of the recordings up on the British Council Sri Lanka Facebook page and our YouTube channel. Thank you to Shiroma and Dinali, and to Shane and Kannan and Rizwan for their support. Thank you, Sinali, for your wonderful support backstage. I know today has not been technically an easy one. For those of you who still like the traditional feel of a book in their hands, our online book ordering service is back, as are our libraries, which are now open. And if you don't carry a local title you are looking for, call Ameena. For those who can't get away from a device, don't forget we have a wonderful digital library that has something for everyone. Absolutely something for everyone. So I hope you do check out our digital library. Thank you again for joining us, and it is good night from me. Keep reading, stay safe, and stay well. Thank you. Bye.